Welcome. This series is called Purpose Didn't Expire. It's about reinvention, permission, and momentum. It is for the woman who has been strong for everyone else but quietly wonders if she waited too long to go after what she really wants. Maybe life interrupted your plans. Maybe responsibility came before dreams. Maybe survival came before purpose. And somewhere along the way, a quiet thought started to settle. Maybe it's too late. That belief is what this series is here to dismantle. Each episode will expose one of the lies that keeps people stuck and replace it with a framework for starting again. And we're beginning with one of the most common lies of all, the belief that time ran out. Before we go any further, I want to tell you why I care so much about this topic. Because I know exactly what it feels like to think your timeline has been interrupted. I grew up in a household shaped by alcoholism and domestic violence. I lost my mother when I was 17 years old, just 2 weeks before graduation. Later in life, I went through a divorce that I thought would break me. And then years later, I remarried only to lose my husband after just 2 years of marriage. At that time, I was left raising a 5-year-old and a 9-month old. There were seasons in my life where survival had to come before dreams. But I started again. Today, I'm happily married. My sons are thriving. I became a grandmother. I earned my doctorate. I built a business and have written multiple motivational books. Now, I'm not sharing that to impress you. I'm sharing it so you understand something more important. Starting again is possible. And sometimes the people who teach reinvention best are the people who had to live it. The lie, it is too late for me. This is the lie. Not always spoken out loud, not always written down, but deeply felt. It is too late for me. Too late to change. Too late to begin again. Too late to want something different. Too late to go after the thing that still lives quietly in the back of my mind. This lie is powerful because it sounds reasonable. It sounds mature. It sounds practical. It sounds like wisdom. But most of the time, it is not wisdom. It is a fear, grief, disappointment, and comparison all tangled together until they start sounding like truth. And that is why this image matters. Because for many people, this belief does not feel simple. It feels tangled. It feels messy. It feels hard to unravel. One part of it comes from age, one part comes from loss, one part comes from the opportunities you did not take, and one part comes from the pressure of watching other people move while you are standing still. And after a while, all of that tangling creates one sentence. It is too late for me. But today, I want to challenge that sentence. Because just because a thought has been repeated does not mean it's true. And just because time has passed does not mean purpose has expired. The lie may be common, it may be even convincing, but it's still a lie. And before this session is over, I want to help you separate what is true from what only feels true. The friction topology, where the lie is born. Before people believe the lie that it's too late for me, something else usually happens first. That belief does not just appear overnight, it forms slowly through friction. through life experiences that begin to weigh on how you see your future. Let me show you some of the places where this lie is usually born. First, comparison culture. We live in a time where it is incredibly easy to measure our lives against someone else's highlight reel. You see someone launching a business at 30, you see someone retiring at 40, someone reinventing themselves at 50, and instead of feeling inspired, the comparison starts whispering something else. You should have done this already. Then there are age milestones. Somewhere along the line, society created invisible deadlines. By this age, you should be established. By that age, you should have figured it out. By this age, you should be settled. And if your path didn't follow that timeline, you start to believe you missed something. Next are career detours. Many people didn't follow a straight line. Life required you and me to pivot, to step away, to take a job for survival instead of purpose. And those detours can make people feel like they somehow fell behind. And then there are seasons of grief. Loss changes timelines. I know firsthand. Whether it's losing someone you love, walking through divorce, caring for family, or simply surviving a difficult chapter of life, grief pauses dreams. And when the world keeps moving while you are healing, it can feel like the clock kept ticking without you. And finally, perfectionism. Perfectionism convinces people they need to have something figured out before they begin. But the truth is, perfectionism doesn't produce excellence, it produces delay. And when those forces pile up over time, something subtle begins to form. A quiet belief, maybe my moment has passed. And that belief is the lie we are dismantling today. Because the truth is, your timeline did not expire, it paused. The compounding costs of believing the clock has run out. Once someone believes or begins to believe the lie that time has run out, something subtle starts to happen. Not all at once, but gradually. It begins with playing small. You stop putting yourself forward. You stop raising your hand. You stop applying for things you once would have tried. You start telling yourself, maybe this opportunity is for someone younger. Maybe that moment has passed for me. So instead of expanding, you begin to shrink your ambitions. The next step is settling. You settle for work that feels safe instead of meaningful. You settle for routines that feel comfortable instead of challenging. You settle for roles that no longer stretch you, not because you stopped caring, but because somewhere along the way you started believing the bigger version of your life might no longer be possible. Then something deeper begins to form: quiet resentment. You may never say it out loud, but you start to feel it. You watch other people take risks, you watch people reinvent themselves, and a part of you begins to wonder, what would have happened if I tried? That quiet question can sit inside people for years. And if nothing interrupts that pattern, it eventually leads to the heaviest step of all: long-term regret. Not regret about failure, but regret about the things you never attempted or tried. The dream you set down, the idea you never explored, the version of yourself you never allowed to emerge. And here is the important truth: most people do not stop pursuing their purpose because they are incapable. They stop because they started believing a story about time that was never true. And that is the lie we are dismantling today. The truth, time did not run out. After everything we just talked about, I want to pause here and say something clearly. The truth is, time did not run out. What actually happened is something very different. You just paused. And there are many reasons people pause. Sometimes life demands it. Sometimes responsibility comes first. Sometimes survival takes priority over dreams. And when you are in survival mode, you are not thinking about reinvention. You are thinking about getting through the day. So if your timeline slowed down for a season, that does not mean your purpose expired. It simply means you paused. And during that pause, something else was happening. You survived. You walked through experiences that shaped you. You navigated challenges that required strength. You carried responsibilities that built resilience. And whether you realize it or not, you were building experience. Experience that someone starting fresh at 25 simply does not have. Experience that comes from navigating real life stuff, from making difficult decisions, from adapting when things did not go according to plan. And that experience is not wasted time, it is preparation. So the story is not that your timeline expired. The story is this: your timeline paused while you were becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. And that means something very important. You are not starting from zero, you are starting from experience. And that is critically important. You have been blaming the clock for a lock you hold the key to. Now, here's the shift that changes everything. For many people, the story they have been telling themselves is that time is the barrier. They look at a calendar, they look at their age, they look at how many years have passed, and they conclude that the opportunity must be gone. But the real barrier is usually not time. The real barrier is permission. Permission to try again. Permission to start imperfectly. Permission to pursue something that may look different than the path you originally imagined. For a long time, many people unconsciously blame the clock. They say, if I had started earlier, if I were younger, if I just had more time. But often, the timeline did not actually stop. What stopped was something internal. You stopped giving yourself permission to walk forward. Sometimes that happens because life interrupted your plan, as we mentioned. Sometimes it happens because you experience loss, as we mentioned, disappointment, or even rejection. And sometimes it happens because you become responsible for other people and their needs had to come first. But eventually, the pause becomes a belief, and that belief says, maybe I missed my moment. What I want you to see today is that the clock is not the gatekeeper of your purpose. Permission is. And the moment you begin granting yourself permission again, the timeline starts moving. The paradigm of expiration versus the paradigm of pause. At this point, we arrive at an important shift in how we interpret our lives. Many people operate from what I call the paradigm of expiration. In this mindset, life is treated like something that has a deadline. And once that deadline passes, the belief becomes, my moment is gone. Let's look at what this mindset sounds like. The first belief is, time is running out. Every year that passes feels like something is slipping away. Then the next belief forms: I am too late. And once someone accepts that thought, their behavior changes. They begin playing small. They stop putting themselves forward. They stop pursuing ideas that once excited them. And over time, that leads to something deeper. Resentment begins to grow. Not always outwardly that you can see, but internally. And eventually, the story becomes my opportunity expired. But there is another way to interpret the exact same life experience. I call it the paradigm of pause. In this mindset, the years that passed were not wasted. Instead, time was compounding. Every experience, every challenge, every responsibility was adding something to your perspective. Instead of saying, I'm too late, the shift becomes, I simply haven't given myself permission yet. And during that time, you were not standing still. You were building experience. You were surviving hard seasons. You were learning things that cannot be taught in a classroom. So the story changes. Your purpose did not expire. It simply paused. And once you see your timeline through the lens of pause instead of expiration, starting again becomes possible. The reinvention model, your trajectory of return. Now that we have dismantled the lie that time ran out, the next question becomes, how do people actually begin again? Because reinvention rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It usually unfolds in stages. What you see here is what I call the reinvention model. It shows trajectory people move through when they restart their purpose. So let's walk through it. The first stage is survival. This is the baseline. It is the season where your focus is simply on getting through. You may be dealing with loss, stress, responsibilities, or major life transitions. During survival, you are not thinking about reinvention. You are thinking about stability. And it's okay. Survival is not failure, it is perseverance. The next stage is stabilization. This is where things begin to level out. You start rebuilding routines. You begin regaining emotional and mental space. The foundation of your life becomes steady again. Many people stay in this stage for a while, and that's okay, it's normal. Because stabilization is where you rebuild your footing. Then something important begins to happen. Right here. Reawakening. This is the moment when the spark returns, an idea comes back, a dream resurfaces. You start feeling curious again. You start asking questions like, what if I tried again? What if I pursued this idea or that idea? Reawakening is the moment where permission begins to return. And once that spark appears, the next stage becomes possible. Reinvention. This is where momentum begins. You start taking action. You start experimenting. You start moving forward with the experience you have built over the years. And here is what is important to understand. Reinvention does not start from zero. It starts from everything you learned during the early years. Your survival built resilience. Your stabilization built a foundation. Your reawakening reignited your vision. And together, those experiences create the momentum that leads to reinvention. Momentum builds identity, and action creates confidence. At this point, many people start asking a very practical question. If my purpose did not expire, And if my timeline simply paused, how do I start moving again? The answer is not by making one huge decision. Reinvention rarely begins with a massive leap. It begins with small, consistent movements. Because momentum changes how we see ourselves when we start taking action again. Something interesting happens. Your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is stuck and you start seeing yourself as someone who is moving again. And that shift creates confidence. But confidence does not come first. Action comes first. Confidence grows from action. That is why I introduced something called the 24-hour reset rule. It is a very simple flywheel designed to restart momentum. It has 3 steps. First, name what you want. Sometimes people stay stuck because they stop allowing themselves to even say what they want anymore. So the first step is honesty. What idea have you been thinking about? What goal have you quietly set aside? What dream have you told yourself is unrealistic? And then the second step is to take one action. Not a full plan, not a 5-year strategy, just one step that moves you forward. And the third step is do it within 24 hours. That time boundary is important because when you delay action too long, doubt comes back in. But when you move quickly, you create momentum. And as that momentum begins to rebuild something powerful, your sense of identity, you start seeing yourself as someone who acts, someone who moves, someone who is capable of starting again. And once momentum begins, it becomes easier to keep going. The permission audit. Before we close, I want to invite you to do something simple but it's powerful. I call this a permission audit. Because sometimes the most important shift in reinvention is not external, it's internal. It is the moment you begin granting yourself permission again. So this exercise has 3 parts. First, the past. I want you to think about this question. What dream did you shelve? Maybe it was a career you once imagined. Maybe it was an idea you once felt excited about. Maybe it was a path you started but stepped away from it when your life really demanded something else. And maybe it was a dream. Many people have a dream they quietly set aside, not because they stopped caring, but because they believed the moment had passed. Second, the lie. Ask yourself this question. What fear justified putting that dream away? Maybe it was the fear of failure. Maybe it was the fear of judgment. Maybe it was the belief that you were too late. Sometimes we do not abandon our dreams. We abandon them because of the story we tell ourselves about why they are no longer possible. And that brings us to the final part, the kinetic spark. This is where movement begins. Ask yourself, what is one next move? Not the entire plan, not the final destination, just one step. One action that will move you slightly closer to that dream. It might be sending an email, researching an idea, or simply having a conversation, or writing something down that you have been afraid to admit you want. Because reinvention does not begin with a massive leap. It begins with a spark of movement. And sometimes that spark is simply the moment you say, I'm allowed to try again. I am allowed to try again. Remember, you are not behind. There is no universal timeline. One of the most damaging beliefs people carry is the idea that there is a single timeline everyone is supposed to follow. That by a certain age, you should have everything figured out, your career, your purpose, your impact. But the truth is, there is no universal timeline. Every life unfolds differently. Every person walks through different seasons. Some people move quickly through their first act. Others spend years navigating responsibilities, hardships, or unexpected detours. But those years are never and not wasted. They are building something. What you see here on the slide is the idea of two acts in a life story. The first act is what I call survival and experience. This is where many of the hard seasons live, the responsibilities, the lessons, the challenges, the resilience you had to build just to keep moving forward. And sometimes people mistakenly believe that those years put them behind, but they did not. They built your foundation. Then Act Two comes, reinvention. Act Two is where you begin applying everything you learned, your perspectives, your wisdom, your lived experiences. Your second act is powerful because it is not built from theory. It is built from everything you already lived through. And that means something important. You are not starting over or at zero. You are starting from experience. Your second act is not a replacement for your first. It is built entirely on top of it. Your purpose did not expire. Purpose did not expire. It paused. Your restart begins right now. As we close this first episode, I want to bring us back to the central idea of this entire series. The lie we dismantled today was the belief that time ran out. But the truth is something very different. Your purpose did not expire. Life may have interrupted your plans. You may have gone through seasons where survival came first. You may have carried responsibilities that required you to set your dreams aside for a season, a time. But those seasons did not erase your purpose. They simply paused the timeline. And during that pause, you were building something important: experience, resilience, perspective, and strength. All of those things become the foundation of what comes next. So if you've been telling yourself that it's just too late, that story ends right now, right here, right now. Your timeline did not expire, it paused. And the moment you begin granting yourself permission to move again, your restart begins. Right now, at this moment. And in our next episode, we will tackle another powerful lie that keeps many people stuck: the belief that I'm not good enough. Because sometimes the barrier is not time, and sometimes it is self doubt. And we are going to dismantle that one too. Thank you.